Some fathers guide. Some fathers protect. But sometimes, a father becomes the very nightmare his child needs protection from. This isn't the story of a stranger lurking in the shadows. This is the story of a father named Richard Callahan and his 13-year-old daughter Sierra. To the world, he was a doting dad. But behind closed doors, Richard ruled through fear, manipulation, and cruelty so twisted it defies belief. And when Sierra finally broke her silence, Richard discovered the one thing no predator wants to face, that he'd been caught. Greenwood, Indiana. The Callahan home sat on a quiet suburban street with neat lawns and white fences. Richard Callahan was a 42-year-old man who seemed to embody fatherhood. He cheered loudest at Sierra's softball games, grilled hot dogs at community cookouts, and walked hand in hand with his daughter through the neighborhood. To neighbors, he was a dad of the year type. To Sierra, he was her hero. With her mother, Linda, working long shifts as a nurse, Richard was her constant companion. But beneath that perfect suburban mask was a darkness Sierra would come to know too well. It began one summer night. Richard drew Sierra into his den, dimly lit and lined with books. He took a knife, sliced his palm, then demanded Sierra do the same. Terrified, she obeyed. He pressed their bloody palms together and whispered, "Now you're bound to me. If you ever tell anyone what we do here, the oath will destroy you, and you'll lose me forever." At just 13 years old, Sierra believed him. That night, the silence began. Richard's abuse escalated. He molested Sierra repeatedly, always reminding her of the oath. He told her no one would believe her anyway, that people thought he was the perfect dad. When Sierra resisted, he threatened her with punishment. His favorite, the deep freezer in the garage. More than once, Sierra was shoved inside, the lid slamming shut, the cold air stealing her breath as she cried and pounded for release. Each time, Richard lifted the lid only when she was too weak to scream. Her childhood was gone. Fear became her normal. At school, Sierra's English essays grew darker. She wrote about cages of ice and monsters with bloody hands. Her teacher, Mrs. Donovan, grew alarmed. When she gently asked Sierra if something was wrong, Sierra froze. Richard's words echoed in her head. "If you tell, you'll lose me. You'll lose everything." Instead of confessing, Sierra smiled weakly and said, "I'm fine." Mrs. Donovan wasn't convinced. She reported her concerns to the school counselor. But when the counselor called Richard in, he put on his mask. He smiled warmly, spoke of Sierra's imagination, and even joked about her love of writing dark stories. The counselor let it go. Richard walked out victorious, his mask unbroken. One evening, Sierra came home from school with bruises on her arm. A neighbor spotted them and asked gently, "Honey, what happened?" Before Sierra could answer, Richard appeared behind her, hand on her shoulder. "Rough game of softball," he chuckled. She slid right into second base. "Didn't you, kiddo?" Sierra nodded quickly, terrified. The neighbor smiled, satisfied. Richard had dodged suspicion again. But inside, Sierra's terror grew. She had proof now. Even when people asked, her father always had the upper hand. One night, Sierra whispered that she was going to tell her mom. Richard's face turned to stone. Without a word, he dragged her to the garage, lifted the freezer lid, and shoved her inside. This time, he held it shut longer. Her screams turned hoarse, her fists weak against the icy lid. When he finally opened it, she collapsed into his arms, sobbing. He stroked her hair and whispered, "See what happens when you threaten me? The freezer will be your coffin if you ever talk." Sierra never forgot the sting of that cold. At school, Sierra's silence cracked. During a counseling session, she whispered the words she had carried for years. "My dad hurts me. He makes me do things. He locks me in the freezer when I don't listen." The counselor's face went pale. She followed protocol immediately, contacting Child Protective Services and law enforcement. A quiet investigation began. But Richard was clever. He noticed changes. Sierra was watched more closely. Linda grew tense around him. An unfamiliar car parked on their street for hours. The predator sensed the hunt was closing in. Detectives interviewed Linda under the guise of a routine welfare check. She nervously answered their questions, torn between suspicion and denial. Richard walked in mid-conversation, his charm cranked to full power. "Officers, everything okay here?" he asked warmly, slipping an arm around his wife. The detectives left with little evidence. Richard turned to Sierra afterward, eyes blazing. "Did you say something? Did you?" That night, he made her sit beside the open freezer, staring into its icy abyss, as he whispered, "Remember your oath." But Sierra wasn't alone anymore. Teachers had documented her essays. The counselor had filed reports. Neighbors had noted odd behavior. A mountain of evidence was building. And then came the night of reckoning. A sharp knock rattled the Callahan front door. Richard opened it to find two detectives standing tall, badges glinting under the porch light. "Mr. Callahan, we need to speak with you." Inside, Sierra clutched her mother, trembling but resolute. Linda's tears flowed as the truth finally settled in. The man she thought was a devoted father was a monster. The detectives laid out everything: Sierra's testimony, the corroborating evidence, the reports. Richard's face drained of color. He shouted, denied, cursed, but Sierra met his gaze. For the first time, her eyes burned with defiance instead of fear. And in that moment, Richard knew. The mask was gone. The predator had been caught. Richard Callahan was arrested and charged with multiple counts of molestation, abuse, and child endangerment. The community that once praised him now spat his name in disgust. Sierra began therapy, slowly piecing her shattered childhood back together. Linda, crushed with guilt, vowed never to let Sierra suffer alone again. The freezer sat empty in the garage, a silent reminder of years of terror. But Sierra no longer feared it. The monster who used it against her was gone. Do you think Sierra's teachers and neighbors should have acted sooner? Could her suffering have been stopped earlier? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story gripped you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the darkest corners of true crime. Because the scariest monsters aren't always strangers. Sometimes, they're the ones who say goodnight.